Welcome to part 2, Communication 101. In any technical or research role, there are lots of places where we have to communicate who we are and what we do. From the beginning part of that process, where you pitch for the work, like in grant proposals or business pitches, through to writing it up in the written word, like in reports or papers or PhD theses, giving presentations in meetings or in conferences, all the way through to disseminating that work to stakeholders or the media or the public or policymakers. All of these instances of communication are opportunities for telling a story. The problem is that this is hard. Communication is hard, particularly when it's technical or new material to people. Lots of the people that I've trained have told me that they find it hard to understand their audience and know what the audience want from them, to choose what information to keep in the report or in the presentation and what to take out to simplify matters, and to keep their audience's attention as they read or as they listen to the presentation. And as we've discussed already, storytelling can help a lot to solve these sorts of communication problems. And in this part, I'm going to take you through from the beginning of the communication process. The first step is to define our aims. And this is a step that people actually often forget, particularly if we're asked to do something by our boss or by another external person. We actually forget to ask, okay, what am I trying to achieve here? What is it that I'm trying to do with this report or this presentation? And there are lots of aims that we can have for communicating. The simplest one, of course, is just to communicate, to put the ideas that are in my head into the heads of my audience. But I might have other aims as well, like to dispel a myth that I think that the audience hold, or to engage them in a two-way dialogue, or to increase my own personal network or gain CV points by being the person that does the presentation or writes the report. Maybe your aim is to influence the public or policymakers in some way. Maybe your aim is to inspire others to do something or to take some form of action. Another good aim is simply for yourself to get better at things. If you want to become a better communicator or a better presenter, the best way to do that is to practice it. And so that can be another good aim as well. The reason I find it important to set out these aims right at the beginning of the process is that it will inform everything that we do from now. Later down the track, when we start writing our stories, we can often get stuck or get writer's block, thinking, what do we need to do next? Returning to what we wrote at the start, returning to what were we trying to achieve in the first place, can often get us unstuck at these sorts of junctures. So that's my first question to you, is what are your aims for the thing that you're trying to communicate? The next step is to ask, who is my audience? And we need to get specific with this. It's completely useless if we think of just a general audience or the general public. That is far too vast a group, far too diverse a group for us to be able to target a message specifically for them. So we need to ask ourselves, who are these people? What's their level of expertise? What do they already know? And what can I add? Are they specialists in a particular subject, or are they more likely to be generalists? How much time do they have available for you? Are they going to dedicate 10 hours of their lives reading your book from cover to cover, or do they just need a really brief summary of the information that they need? How big is the audience? Obviously, the bigger the audience, the greater the spread of all of these other aspects, the more diverse your audience is likely to be. And do they have some sort of professional stake in what you're saying? For example, if you're communicating at a job interview, those people are looking for certain criteria. So can you give them those criteria in your story to make their job easier? Depending on the type of communication, things like age bracket might be important, particularly if you're talking to members of the public. Are they likely to be a younger audience or more of a mixed age range? Is your audience's cultural background going to be a relevant factor? These things, age and cultural background, can be a particularly influencing factor if you're thinking about the sorts of cultural references or societal touch points that you want to include. Do your audience have a personal relationship to the subject matter that you're going to talk about? Sometimes I train researchers who work on cancer or Alzheimer's. When they talk to the public about those sorts of things, they need to be aware that the audience will likely have a personal stake in what they're doing, a personal relationship to the subject matter. So the way that they talk about patients or success rates has a huge emotive element for their audience. And so they need to be careful about how they're going to tell that story to make sure that they're being sensitive to that. And finally, any accessibility requirements that your audience might have. What are the best formats for them? How can you make it as easy as possible for them to digest the information? So you can find those questions on the worksheet. What are your aims and who is your audience? Who exactly is going to be there? The third question on there is, what do these people want from me? Not only who are they, but what do they want from me? So what are they trying to get from your piece of communication? Are they simply interested in information? In which case you need to put that front and centre. Are they interested in specific details, do you think, about the methods or the results of your study, for example? Are they listening to you because they want to be informed by an expert, in which case you need to tell them your credentials and give them that? Is one of the things that they need from you brevity? Are they an incredibly busy policymaker and they just need the key details? They don't need you to tell a great big long story about the background. Are they needing convincing, do you think? Are they needing inspiring or wanting new ideas from you? Are they looking to be entertained? That's something that some academics forget about, is that the idea of entertainment is also really important in how we communicate, even in quite a formal professional setting. And then also this aspect of accessibility. What do they need from you in order to process the information as you're intending? Again, defining our aims, defining our audience, and defining what it is that they want and need from us is a really useful process to do at the start, because later down the track it can get us unstuck if we think we're not sure where our story is going next. Having the answers to these questions, what are my aims, who's my audience, and what do they want and need from me, on a wall of imagined or physical post-it notes around your laptop as you're writing a report or a presentation is super useful, because those are our reference points. As we go through and write our story, we might get writer's block or become stuck in some way, not sure what to include. Returning to the answers to those questions can help us solve those problems. So on the accompanying worksheet, take some time to think about who is your audience and what do they want and need from you. Having established then what our aims and our audience and their wants and needs are, we then need to come up with a bit of a plan as to what we're going to do next. So if our aim was to simply communicate some ideas, we need to think about what those ideas are, maybe make a list of the key points that you want to include. If our aim was to engage in a two-way dialogue with our audience, do you have a plan for how you're going to practically achieve that? What is it that you want to say to each other? And if your aim was to increase your own personal network, then what can you put in place to make that the most effective? Look at the worksheet, think about how you're going to make a plan to meet those aims for those audiences. Now that we've got our aims, our audiences, and our plan in place, the final part before we start writing our story is to work out exactly what that story is going to be. For any set of factual information, there are always different ways that you can spin a story. There are always different tales to tell. And one key skill that we can learn as a storyteller is to develop an intuition about what's the best story for these aims and for these audiences. To help you develop that intuition, it's helpful to think from the audience's perspective. So for example, if your aim was to engage your audience in dialogue or to increase your network or to be kind of inspiring and to connect with your audience in a human way, then the sort of story that you might think about writing would be a human-centered one, and one that is centered on you and your experience. If your aim was to dispel myths that you think your audience hold, you might think about writing a story that's about change or transformation with a strong evidence base to back it up. And if your aim is to influence the public or to policy, you might start by focusing on the big picture and then think about how to make it relevant for the audience, having established the problem and having established that big picture. You can find lots of examples of different story approaches on the worksheet as a guide. But I think ultimately the point that I want to get across is that, yes, you're a communicator in this instance, but you're also more often than not an audience member. So these aren't an alien group of people. If you think about the stories that speak to you, if you think about your favourite story that I asked you to think about at the beginning, what are the things that resonate with you? What are the things that work? When you see other people who are great communicators, who are great writers, can you unpick what they're doing and try and emulate that yourself for your audiences?